Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, June 17, 2025. President Donald Trump back in Washington, returning early from the Group of Seven Leaders Summit in Canada, posting and commenting about the ongoing military conflict between Israel and Iran, including he wants better than a ceasefire, and I have not reached out to Iran for peace talks in any way, shape, or form, calling that fake news. Also, we have now complete and total control of the skies over Iran. And about Iran's supreme leader, we are not going to take him out, kill, at least not for now. U.S. Court of Appeals in San Francisco hears oral argument in Newsom v. Trump, a case involving California Governor Gavin Newsom challenging President Donald Trump's deployment of National Guard troops in response to immigration protests without the governor's consent. We'll talk about it with the Hill's legal affairs reporter, Zach Schoenfeld. Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, deletes social media posts in which he blames Democrats and Marxists for the fatal shooting of a Minnesota state lawmaker and her husband and the wounding of another lawmaker and his wife. Plus the latest on proposed Medicaid changes in the Senate Republican version of the budget reconciliation bill, the one they call the One Big Beautiful Bill, and those changes are different than the House-passed version. Associated Press writes Israel claimed Tuesday to have killed a top Iranian general as it traded more strikes with its longtime foe, and U.S. President Donald Trump warned residents of Tehran to evacuate while suggesting that the United States could give up on negotiations. Trump left the Group of Seven summit in Canada a day early to deal with the conflict between Israel and Iran, telling reporters on Air Force One during the flight back to Washington, "I'm not looking at a ceasefire, we're looking at better than a ceasefire." That was from AP. Here's part of that gaggle on Air Force One.
You just posted right before we took off that you're not leaving because of a ceasefire. Why are you? Can you elaborate?
We're looking at better than a ceasefire. We're not looking for a ceasefire. I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're not looking. We're looking for better than a ceasefire.
That's just what you're looking to get into this more. You're not going to involve the U.S. in this conflict at this stage. You're going to do anything more for Israel right now?
Pretty well. Right now, we're doing pretty well. Remember, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. We don't have to go too deep into it. They just can't have a nuclear weapon.
What was the thinking on the call for Tehran to evacuate? Is there a threat or is there incoming? What was the thinking on the full evacuation?
I want people to be safe. And that's always possible. A thing like that could happen. I just want people to be safe.
President Donald Trump speaking to reporters on Air Force One Monday night, flying back from the G7 leaders meeting in Canada to Washington, D.C. And today, several news outlets citing a White House official speaking on condition of anonymity that the president held a meeting in the White House Situation Room with his national security team discussing the Israel-Iran conflict. President also posting a lot about that on Truth Social, including this: "I have not reached out to Iran for peace talks in any way, shape, or form. This is just more highly fabricated fake news. If they want to talk, they know how to reach me. They should have taken the deal that was on the table, would have saved a lot of lives." And we now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran. Iran had good sky trackers and other defensive equipment, and plenty of it, but it doesn't compare to American-made, conceived, and manufactured stuff. Nobody does it better than the good old USA. And we know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He is an easy target, but is safe there. We are not going to take him out, kill, at least not for now. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Those posts from President Donald Trump. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce held a news conference today at the State Department in Washington, getting questions about the president's views.
Yes, ma'am.
President Trump said he wants a real end, not a ceasefire. So does the United States support or pursue regime change in Iran? Or are we just talking about dismantling Iran's nuclear enrichment? And would that include the United States helping Israel strike further?
Well, I'm certainly not going to characterize what President Trump says or tweets, for that matter. He doesn't need characterizing. He's one of the most transparent, one of the most clear individuals that we've known. I think that we can take his word for his word, but I'm not going to speculate on, in a larger sense, what that would mean. That is up to the president. He is the singular guiding hand about what will be occurring from this point forward, as he has been. And I think that dynamic is pretty clear. He says he wants an end as he has said about every conflict that he has, as a peacemaker, worked to stop peacefully through diplomacy. That has been his commitment. And he wants these things, as he said about a number of situations, not for a month or 6 months, but durable ends to this nature of forever wars. And that has been his posture, and that's his posture now.
State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce at her news conference at the State Department in Washington. From Reuters, an Israeli military strike on Iran's nuclear complex at Natanz directly hit the underground uranium enrichment plant there. The UN nuclear watchdog said on Tuesday, revising its assessment after initially reporting it had been hit only indirectly. Since Israel launched wide-ranging attacks on Iran on Friday, the International Atomic Energy Agency has been providing updates on its assessment of the damaged nuclear sites, although it has not been able to carry out inspections. Some reporting from Reuters. Congressman Thomas Massie, Republican of Kentucky, writing on X Monday night, "This is not our war, but if it were, Congress must decide such matters according to our Constitution. I'm introducing a bipartisan war powers resolution tomorrow to prohibit our involvement. I invite all members of Congress to co-sponsor this resolution." And the main Democratic co-sponsor is Ro Khanna of California. Over on the Senate side, Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, was on MSNBC talking about his Iran war powers resolution.
When I got elected to the Senate in 2012, I told myself that if I ever had the chance to stop an unnecessary war of the kind we were living through then, I would do everything possible to do that, and that's why I filed this resolution.
But I got to follow up. I mean, you even just said yourself that this problem has a precedent, the need for congressional approval being run over. So why and how would this be different with this bill, especially with this president?
So here's what I know, Mika. I filed a similar bill after President Trump took the strike that killed Soleimani back in 2019 or early 2020. And I basically said the U.S. should not be at war with Iran. And two Republican houses, a Republican Senate and the Democratic House, backed me up on that. We passed that resolution. It went to the president's desk. He vetoed it, and we couldn't override the veto. But we noticed something interesting. President Trump dialed back the aggressive actions toward Iran because he saw that both bodies, including significant numbers of Republicans, were telling him our constituents don't want a war. In some ways, I view this resolution as reminding Donald Trump what he has said since 2016, which is the U.S. should not be in endless wars in the Middle East. And you can tell the wording coming from President Trump and his advisors is somewhat mixed messages. Some want to go all in against Iran. Some are reminding him that he ran against endless wars in the Middle East. I hope this resolution will send a message to him, to Israel, and to Iran that the U.S. does not want to be at war with Iran. If they attack the U.S., we'll defend ourselves. If they attack U.S. troops, U.S. consuls, we'll defend ourselves. But what we don't want is a war with Iran right now, and I hope and expect that a majority of my colleagues believe that.
Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, today on MSNBC. Vice President J.D. Vance putting out a statement about that debate within the Republican Party that Senator Kaine referred to. And the vice president's post ends with, President Trump may decide he needs to take further action to end Iranian enrichment. That decision ultimately belongs to the president. And of course, people are right to be worried about foreign entanglement after the last 25 years of idiotic foreign policy. But I believe the president has earned some trust on this issue, and having seen this up close and personal, I can assure you that he is only interested in using the American military to accomplish the American people's goals. Whatever he does, that is his focus. The end of the post today from Vice President J.D. Vance. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, was asked at a news conference today about Senator Kaine's war powers resolution.
Does the Trump administration need to seek authorization from Congress if they choose to strike Iran?
Well, I mean, I think right now the president's within his authorities. He obviously has a lot of authority as commander-in-chief to respond to incidents that happen around the world. Obviously, we have a lot of military installations, bases, military personnel in the region right now. And so I think he's perfectly within his right to do what he's done so far. And obviously, I think they're giving analysis to what may happen next in that theater. But we want to ensure that there is a good outcome there, hopefully a peaceful outcome. And I think the president's made it abundantly clear to the Iranians that he would like to be part of helping negotiate a deal that would end their nuclear program. But one way or the other, they've got to end their nuclear program. That's the end state of what happens with this. And I think the president is very committed to that objective.
Would you allow, under those circumstances, would you then allow a war powers resolution to come to the floor so that Congress would have the authority if a strike were to occur, if the administration went down that?
I think right now, I think we're getting the cart ahead of the horse here. This is something that's happened in the last few days. I think the president is perfectly within his authority in the steps that he has taken. Clearly, if this thing were to extend for some period of time, there could be a more fulsome discussion about what the role of Congress should be and whether or not we need to take action. But I think right now, let's hope and pray for the best outcome, the best solution. And in my view, that would be Iran coming to the negotiating table and agreeing to end their nuclear program.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, was on Fox News Channel Monday night urging the president to take further steps.
Be all in, President Trump, in helping Israel eliminate the nuclear threat. If we need to provide bombs to Israel, provide bombs. If we need to fly planes with Israel, do joint operations. But here's the bigger question. Wouldn't the world be better off if the Ayatollahs went away and replaced by something better? Wouldn't Iran be better off? Tom Cotton is coming on. He made a great observation. The endless war is Iran. Since 1979, they've been attacking the entire region, chanting death to America, death to Israel since their very founding. It's time to close the chapter on the Iranian Ayatollah and his henchmen. Let's close that chapter soon and start a new chapter in the Mideast, one of tolerance, hope, and peace.
Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, interviewed on Fox News Channel Monday night, referring to Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, who chairs the Intelligence Committee. From USA Today, the Pentagon has shifted warplanes and an aircraft carrier to the Middle East as the conflict between Israel and Iran continues to rage. But the moves have been defensive in nature as the U.S. observes rather than participates in Israel's punishing air campaign, according to U.S. officials. The moves by the U.S. military have been made with an eye toward protecting American troops stationed in the Middle East, as senior defense officials said. There are about 40,000 U.S. service members there. From USA Today. And this is Washington Today. Story from the Wall Street Journal. A day after President Trump signaled that Ukraine isn't a top priority and following Russia's deadliest attack on Kyiv in weeks, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Canada to lobby other allies for help against Moscow. But even if Zelensky wins support for more sanctions on Russia from leaders of the Group of Seven industrialized nations after Trump left their summit early, Trump's lack of criticism of Russia promises to complicate any effort to increase pressure on the Kremlin. That was from the Wall Street Journal. One of President Zelensky's meetings today was with the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney.
I would like to start by condemning, in the strongest terms, the latest outrage, barbarism from Russia, and express my deep condolences and those of the Canadian people to the families in Kyiv who were affected. This underscores the importance of standing in total solidarity with Ukraine, with the Ukrainian people, and we had a discussion last night amongst G7 leaders. The President and I will discuss more, and then of course we'll have the direct discussion in a moment together. But we underscored the importance of using maximum pressure against Russia, who has refused to come to the table. The President has led unconditionally to come to the table in search of peace. And maximum pressure includes financial pressure, and Canada is announcing today several measures, sanctions, first and foremost, against a number of individuals in Russia, against over 40 entities in Russia and beyond that are trying to contribute to the evasion of sanctions, the sanctioning of over 200 vessels in the shadow fleet that Russia is using, again, to try to evade these sanctions. That's the first thing. The second is we are providing additional military assistance, drones, helicopters, broader munitions, over $2 billion worth of assistance directly to Ukraine. And thirdly, we are dispersing the next tranche of the loan based on the frozen Russian assets, over $2 billion as well. This is our contribution. We'll be working with our European and other allies for their contributions to provide the support. And to be absolutely clear, this support will be unwavering until we get a just peace for Ukrainian people.
Thanks so much, dear Prime Minister. First of all, good to be here in Canada, and for the G7 summit, thank you for your invitation. But first of all, thank you for your very important words, warm words, and supporting Ukraine. Of course, condolences to our families. Really, our families had very difficult night. One of the biggest attacks from the very beginning of this war, 440 Shaheeds, Iranian drones, and 32 missiles, including ballistic. And I was on direct connection during the flight with all the ministers and of course with the chief of air defense. And really, it was a big attack on civilian infrastructure, on people, just people, houses, and etc. And for now, information is not total information, not that final information, but for now we have 138 injured people and 12 killed. And so, yes, it's a big tragedy for us, and we need support from our allies, and I'm here, and thank you for the military package. It's important for our soldiers to be strong at the battlefield, to stay strong until Russia will not be ready for the peace negotiations. We are ready for the peace negotiations, unconditional ceasefire. I think it's very important, but for this we need pressure. And of course, I want to speak with Prime Minister today about sanctions, additional sanctions, and thanks for the real unwavering support from your side, from all the Canadians to our people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meeting the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Alberta, Canada. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte also at the summit today. The Independent newspaper out of Great Britain writes that talks toward tightening the Russian oil cap are ongoing, Sir Keir Starmer said, as he denied plans for a so-called coalition of the willing to protect Ukraine were dead. The Prime Minister said he strongly believes that restrictions on the price of Russian crude oil should be strengthened to deplete the revenues Vladimir Putin uses to fund his war machine. Back in the U.S., ABC News writes the legal battle over the Trump administration's deployment of the National Guard in California heads to a federal appeals court on Tuesday. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals will preside over a remote hearing regarding California's challenge to President Donald Trump's federalization of the state's National Guard troops amid protests over immigration enforcement in the Los Angeles area. That was from ABC News. C-SPAN covered the oral argument. It was held virtually. Coming up, we're going to speak with a legal affairs reporter about what he heard. First, here's some of that argument. Brett Shumate, Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Division at the Justice Department, arguing for the federal government. And then a question from Judge Mark Bennett.
Even California concedes that there is ongoing civil unrest in Los Angeles. But this is no ordinary civil unrest. As we've explained in the Santa Cruz declarations, federal personnel continue to face sustained mob violence in Los Angeles, expressly aimed at preventing federal officers from enforcing federal law. Unfortunately, local authorities are either unable or unwilling to protect federal personnel and property from the mob violence ongoing in Los Angeles today. Under these conditions, the president acted well within his discretion in calling up the Guard, based on his determination that the violent riots in Los Angeles constitute a rebellion against the authority of the United States that rendered him unable to execute federal laws. Yet the district court improperly second-guessed the president's judgment about the need to call up the Guard in order to protect federal property and personnel from mob violence in Los Angeles.
Mr. Shumate. So I want to start by drilling down on one aspect of our standard of review. And I'm going to be discussing subsection 3 only of section 12406. And you just said the president acted well within his discretion. Again, just as to section 3, Is it the United States' position that the court has no role at all in reviewing what the president has done in calling forth the militia under subsection 3? Or is it the United States' view that the court has a limited role and needs to afford the president very substantial deference? Or is it something else in deciding whether the requirements of subsection 3, inability with the regular forces to execute the laws, is met?
Thank you, Your Honor. Our view is that this statute commits the decision whether to call up the forces to the president's unreviewable discretion. So no, there's no role for the court to play in reviewing that decision. And I think it's important to note that the statute here is very similar to the statute at issue in the Martin case that we've cited, the Act of 1795, which had a similar structure. It had the whenever clause followed by a delegation to the president to call up the militia. And in that case, the Supreme Court in 1830 said, that's a decision that's committed to the president's discretion. It's not for a court to review that decision. The plaintiffs try to make out that decision as an outlier, but of course, there have been many cases since then involving unreviewable decisions committed to the executive. The last we've cited is the Dalton case.
Brett Shumate, Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Division, arguing for the federal government at today's oral argument, the U.S. Court of Appeals, Ninth Circuit. Arguing for California, Sam Harbord, the state's supervising deputy solicitor general.
The framers of our Constitution gave Congress the authority to enact statutes governing when the president may call forth a state's National Guard into federal service. The only statute invoked here, 10 U.S.C. Section 12406, requires that one of 3 factual predicates exist before that authority may be exercised, and requires that the federalization order be issued, quote, through the governor. But on June 7th, for the first time in our nation's history, defendants federalized thousands of members of the state National Guard in circumstances where none of those factual predicates exist, and they circumvented the governor, who did not receive the order and who certainly did not issue it. For those reasons, the district court rightly held that the state is likely to prevail in showing that these actions exceeded the proper bounds of executive authority. In each of the equitable factors, counsels strongly against a stay pending appeal, which would allow defendants to prolong this unprecedented, unlawful executive action. To be sure, Los Angeles has seen certain episodes of unrest and even violence in recent days, including violence directed at state and local law enforcement officials. The state has strongly condemned these acts, and it has responded forcefully to them.
Sam Harbord, California Supervising Deputy Solicitor General, part of the oral argument in the case Newsom v. Trump. And joining us now to talk about it is Zach Schoenfeld, legal affairs reporter with The Hill. Thank you for being with us. What did you hear today?
Well, after the appeals court arguments, which lasted just over an hour, California Governor Gavin Newsom in California got a pretty frosty reception. This is a 3-judge panel. There are 2 Trump appointees and one Biden appointee, But what we heard from all 3 judges is believing that there is Supreme Court precedent on the books that gives the president broad authority to declare emergencies that can trigger the ability for him to deploy troops domestically. And we heard from all 3 judges asking questions and seeming to believe that that Supreme Court precedent forecloses this case. So we really saw them being a bit skeptical of that lower judge's order that would block Trump's National Guard deployment. Now, that ruling has been lifted until the panel rules following this hearing. But coming out of these arguments, I think I would definitely want to be the administration and not Governor Newsom.
Now, California's position is that the rebellion or invasion that's happening is not similar to ones in the past, but was that even a factor in the arguments?
Well, the primary argument that we hear from the administration is the court doesn't even need to get into was the conditions that Trump says was met, what was the state of things on the streets in Los Angeles. But that doesn't matter because they believe that when the president makes a finding that there is a rebellion against the United States, that he is authorized to federalize the National Guard. So they have told the courts that there is no role for judicial review of that determination. Now, they have also told the courts that if they disagree with that and they agree that there is some way here for the court to review that determination, that there is ample evidence to suggest that there were things on the ground by that point about a week ago now in which it amounted to a rebellion against the United States. The other trigger that would allow Trump to federalize the National Guard is if he can show that he would be otherwise unable to execute federal laws using regular forces. So that's the argument that you heard from the Trump administration today.
What precedents are there in cases like this? What were any cited today?
One of the main cases that you heard over and over again in today's argument is an 1827 decision that's called Martin v. Mott. This is actually a decision that arises out of the War of 1812. So quite back in the nation's history, the dust is coming off now again. And essentially in that case, the court said that the president has pretty exclusive authority to decide when there is some emergency out there that is justifying the use of military power. Now, California, their argument in court has been that this 1827 Supreme Court decision is a very different case, and so it doesn't apply here. But so much of these lower court proceedings are going to turn on how this panel views that 1827 case, Martin v. Mott. We actually heard from one of the judges today, Judge Eric Miller, one of the Trump appointees. He told California's lawyer at one point, these might be good arguments for the Supreme Court to determine if they want to overrule these precedents, but saying that they, as a lower court, are bound by them until the Supreme Court acts.
We're talking with Zach Schoenfeld from The Hill. Well, this was a 3-judge panel today, Court of Appeals. Further appeals likely, I assume. Is this heading to the Supreme Court?
It seems that there is a good possibility that one way or another this is going to get to the Supreme Court. In fact, right before the arguments concluded, the Trump administration lawyer told this panel that if they're inclined to side with California and allow the courts here to block the National Guard deployment, that they have asked for the deployment to stay intact until they can file an emergency appeal immediately at the Supreme Court. So it's certainly, at least from the Trump administration today, certainly signaling that if they lose at this stage, that they're going to go to the Supreme Court. Now, at this point, Gavin Newsom, could have tried to go to the Supreme Court. He has not yet. So we'll have to wait and see once this ruling comes out of whoever loses, whether they will take this to the justices next.
Final question. We've been talking about the National Guard. What about the U.S. Marines activated in California? Is that part of this case? Is there a separate case somewhere?
That is not part of this order that Judge Charles Breyer had issued last week. And the reason that it wasn't part of his injunction is he noted that there had been that announcement that 700 Marines would be heading to Los Angeles, but saying that at that point they hadn't actually, gone into the city and started really, doing much or doing anything. So he had told California at that hearing last week that it was too speculative for him to intervene. Now, of course, since that hearing, there was a report that Marines at one point conducted an arrest. And so there are continued questions over, as that Marine deployment continues to develop, as to whether the courts will be asked again to step in here. And one other key thing to note is that everyone's been watching to see whether the administration here invokes the Insurrection Act, which would give the president authority to allow to have the military to go in domestically and carry out certain functions. He has not invoked the Insurrection Act quite yet, but the question becomes, will he do so?
Zach Schoenfeld, legal affairs reporter with The Hill. Find his articles at thehill.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Senator Alex Padilla, Democrat of California, got emotional today as he spoke on the Senate floor in Washington about what happened last week when he attended a news conference in Los Angeles, where Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was talking about enforcement operations of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and deployment of the National Guard and Marines. And the senator was handcuffed and removed as he tried to ask a question.
But before I could even get out my question, I was physically and aggressively forced out of the room. even as I repeatedly announced I was a United States Senator and I had a question for the Secretary. And even as the National Guardsman and the FBI agent who served as my escorts and brought me into that press briefing room stood by, silently, knowing full well who I was. You've seen the video. I was pushed and pulled, struggled to maintain my balance. I was forced to the ground, first on my knees, and then flat on my chest. And as I was handcuffed and marched down a hallway, repeatedly asking, why am I being detained? Not once did they tell me why. I pray you never have a moment like this. But I will tell you, in that moment, a lot of questions came to my mind. First of all, where are they taking me? Because I know I'm not just being escorted out of the building. Am I being arrested here? And what will a city already on edge from being militarized think when they see their United States Senator being handcuffed just for trying to ask a question? And what will my wife think? What will our boys think? And I also remember asking myself, if this aggressive escalation is the result of someone speaking up against the abuses and overreach of the Trump administration, was it really worth it? But colleagues, how many Americans in our nation's history have marched, have protested, have shed blood, even lost their lives to protect our rights? How many Americans have served in wars overseas to protect our freedoms here at home? And how many Americans in the year 2025 see a vindictive president on a tour of retribution, unrestrained by the majority of this separate and co-equal branch of government, and wonder if it's worth it to stand up or to speak out? If a United States senator becomes too afraid to speak up, how can we expect any other American to do the same?
Senator Alex Padilla, Democrat from California, today on the Senate floor in Washington. That question that he said he was trying to ask was after Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem said the purpose of the troops deployed to L.A. were to liberate that city from the governor and the mayor. Story from Politico. New York City mayoral candidate Brad Lander was handcuffed and detained by federal agents Tuesday afternoon while escorting migrants from immigration hearings in Lower Manhattan. Footage and video of the hectic incident is firing up the third-place candidate's suddenly energetic campaign as he shows himself taking on an issue that's central to President Donald Trump's political agenda. That's reporting from Politico. Here's part of the video.
Guys, back up, guys. Back up. I understand you're pregnant, but I need you to back up. If you're interfering with this arrest, we're going to be arrested. Back up, guys. Back up, guys.
This is not legal to take someone without a judicial warrant.
Please don't put him in the elevator and then claim you have the warrant.
We don't have a warrant for him.
I will let go when you show me the judicial warrant. Where is it?
I have my hand here. So show it. Let us see it. So let us see it before you take us before it.
Excuse me, please stay back, stay back. Take it back, stay back. Step back. Please, step back. Step back, guys, step back.
U.S. citizens. Sir, you don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens.
New York City mayoral candidate Brad Lander being handcuffed and detained by federal agents this afternoon while escorting migrants from immigration hearings in Lower Manhattan. There's a story from Fox News saying he's being charged with allegedly assaulting a federal officer. Pentagon said today that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth last week authorized up to 700 troops to assist federal immigration officials in Florida, Louisiana, and Texas in processing detainees at ICE facilities. And from the Washington Post, Department of Homeland Security on Monday told staff that it was reversing guidance issued last week that agents were not to conduct immigration raids at farms, hotels, and restaurants, a decision that stood at odds with President Donald Trump's calls for mass deportations of anyone without legal status. Washington Today continues in a moment.
In a nation divided, a rare moment of unity. This fall, C-SPAN presents Ceasefire, where the shouting stops and the conversation begins. In a town where partisan fighting prevails. One table, two leaders, one goal, to find common ground. This fall, Ceasefire, on the network that doesn't take sides, only on C-SPAN.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, begins an article at The Hill. On Tuesday, deleted social media posts he made blaming the left for the fatal shooting of a Minnesota state legislator. As of Tuesday afternoon, the post that seemingly made light of the shootings that killed State Representative Melissa Hortman, a Democrat, and her husband, and wounded State Senator John Hoffman, a Democrat, and his wife, were gone from the Utah Republicans' @based Mike Lee account. One post from over the weekend had dubbed the killing the nightmare on Wall Street, a apparent reference to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat, while the other said, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way." The move came after intense blowback from Democrats. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York publicly called on Lee to take down the post and urged President Trump and Republicans to do the same, arguing that Lee might listen to them. That was from The Hill. Here is Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democrat of Minnesota, asked about this today.
Senator Lee took down his tweets related to the shooting. He said he had a conversation with you about that. Is there any insight you can provide, and do you feel better about the direction this is headed after that conversation?
Other than Senator Schumer's going to have me talk to Senator Lee about things in the future. Senator Lee, I told him what I've said publicly, that this isn't one bit funny for my state. They spent the weekend, many of them locked in their homes in certain areas, depending on where they thought that the murderer went. For many, Melissa Hortman and her husband were beloved. Republicans in our state have come out very strong against this violence. And in fact, Congressman Emmer and I led a bipartisan statement of every single member of our delegation decrying this violence, calling it politically motivated, and saying there's no place for this in our politics. So Senator Lee and I had a good discussion, and I'm very glad he took it down. And I also thank my colleague, Senator Smith, for also speaking out on this.
Did he seem remorseful?
Or contrite?
Okay, I'm not going to go into our discussion, or I wouldn't be able to get things done, but I will just say he took it down.
Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democrat from Minnesota, at a news conference today. At a separate news conference, the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, spoke about a security briefing that senators had this morning.
First, I want to say that the Capitol Hill police have been silent heroes behind the scenes keeping members safe. But we are seeing a dramatic increase in threats against senators, congressmen, public officials, and throughout America. And these attacks are not just attacks on individuals, but on democracy, on our way of life, on what we believe in, and they're an attempt to intimidate people not to do their jobs, not to run for office, It's gross, it's disgusting. We must take immediate steps to ensure the safety of members, and that includes increased funding for the Capitol Police. And there was agreement in our meeting between Democrats and Republicans that we ought to have that increased funding. The Republicans are such hypocrites. Today, the Trump administration cut the AIMED program, AIMED. That's a program aimed to spot lone wolf actor violent people, violent extremists. Doesn't that sound exactly what like happened in Minnesota? And they're cutting it. It's outrageous, but that's what they do. The last top officials at this program that aims to spot the so-called lone actor, violent domestic extremists were reassigned. In the 4 months that Trump has took office, his administration has shrunk the Department of Homeland Security's Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, CP3, from dozens of analysts to fewer than 10 people. So here, with violence increasing, they are shrinking the number of law enforcement people aimed at trying to prevent that violence from ever occurring. Right now, we need to give our law enforcement more, not less. It's just totally hypocritical of this administration.
The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at a news conference today. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, spoke about the shootings in Minnesota as he opened the Senate this morning.
Mr. President, like all Americans, I was horrified to hear about this weekend shootings of 2 state lawmakers in Minnesota and their spouses. Melissa Hortman, a member of the Minnesota House of Representatives, and her husband Mark were murdered on Saturday. And John Hoffman, a member of the state Senate, and his wife Yvette were seriously wounded. I'm profoundly grateful to law enforcement that the alleged shooter is now in custody, and I look forward to seeing him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. There's no place for this kind of violence in our country. None. My prayers this morning are with the Hortman's family and loved ones, and for the speedy recovery of John and Yvette Hoffman.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, on the Senate floor. CBS News writes that President Trump said Tuesday that he won't call Minnesota Governor Tim Walz after the targeted shootings of 2 state lawmakers because it would be a waste of time. One of the lawmakers and her husband were killed. The president spoke to reporters early Tuesday aboard Air Force One as he flew back to Washington after abruptly leaving the G7 summit in Canada. White House said the president wants to better monitor the rising tensions in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. Asked if he planned to call Walz, Trump said the Democratic governor is sick and whacked out and said, "I'm not calling him." That from CBS News. Mediaite writes that former CNN anchor Jim Acosta denounced President Donald Trump as a danger to this country during a forum in Washington on Tuesday. Speaking on a panel hosted by the left-leaning Center for American Progress think tank, Acosta made clear his belief that the president is a threat to the homeland.
People have to just start thinking bigger in this country, and they have to look at what we're up against. I've been sort of trying to shout this from the rooftops or wherever anybody will listen to me, at the end of a bar in Kansas City, whatever. The President of the United States is a danger to this country, full stop. And I think what we saw over the weekend with the No Kings protests is a mobilization, but to some extent, a recognition that that is the case. And I think you're starting to see some of this reflected in the polling. Even people in the Republican Party were afraid to show up at his birthday parade, the dictator Kim Jong-un birthday parade that he tried to have over the weekend, where you saw the video of the tank going by the empty stands, and you heard the squeaking of the tracks of the tank, and it was sort of like, what is this? And so, you know, I think the other thing is, you know, folks have to have hope. You have to have hope that we're going to get through this. You know, if hundreds of thousands of millions of people had shown up and cheered on Trump as those tanks were rolling down Constitution Avenue, then maybe I'd be a little bit more worried today. But what I saw over the weekend was the millions upon millions of people who are opposed to what he's trying to do to American society, showing up in almost every town and community in this country. That was a very powerful thing. And so to some extent, we just have to, and I said this when I signed off from my job at CNN. I said, you don't want to give in to the lies, you don't want to give in to fear, but you have to hold on to hope. And as Pollyannish and as cheesy and quaint as that sounds maybe to the young people, I think some of us who are longer in the tooth understand that all too well. And one of the images that I took away from this past weekend that really stayed with me were those military veterans. There were some of these military veterans who had fought in World War II and said, we defeated fascism the last time, I'm here to do it this time. I don't know if anybody saw those images, but they were very stirring images, I thought. And so to some extent, I think we have to have a little bit of faith in each other that we can get through this.
Jim Acosta, a former CNN anchor, he left the network after 18 years back in January. Today, at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C., a panel discussion about President Trump and free speech. This is Washington Today. Senate leaders spoke today about Monday's release of the Senate Finance Committee's text of the tax and Medicaid portions of their budget reconciliation bill, the one big beautiful bill as they're calling it. And that text is different from the House-passed version in some key ways, including deeper cuts to Medicaid spending and lowering the state and local tax deduction, SALT, from $40,000 in the House bill to $10,000 in the Senate bill. On Medicaid, CBS News writes that GOP senators have proposed steeper cuts to Medicaid funding by lowering provider taxes, which states use to help fund their share of Medicaid costs, from 6% to 3.5% by 2031. The House bill seeks to lower federal costs by freezing states' provider taxes at current rates and prohibiting them from establishing new provider taxes. Several Republicans have said the bill could lose their support if the provider tax were to be frozen or decreased, pointing to the potential negative impact on rural hospitals. Republican Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri expressed alarm over the changes, telling reporters that it's a major departure from the House bill. That was from CBS News. Attending the Senate Republican lunch meeting today, Vice President J.D. Vance and Dr. Mehmet Oz, administrator of CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Dr. Oz joined the Senate Republicans at a news conference and took some questions about this.
Is the administration willing to consider changes to the provider tax, particularly the concerns that are being raised by people like Senator Josh Hawley, who believe that what's in the Senate bill will lead to the closure of rural hospitals?
We do not believe that addressing the provider tax effort is going to influence the ability of hospitals to stay viable. In fact, the provider tax and the state-directed payments are often used to pay institutions that have the best connections to the government of the state, not necessarily the hospitals that need the help the most. It is important that we clean up this system. These programs have grown dramatically. The provider tax now, which has dramatically increased once it became apparent that you could game the system, is now becoming a dominant part of financing our states. It's not where the money should be going. The money should be spent wisely in a very transparent way. There are better ways of addressing these needs, and the state-directed payments are another part of that equation that likewise complicate issues unnecessarily. People who need the money to get the best care possible because they're offering quality should be rewarded, and they're in ways that CMS and the federal government can do that more effectively for the American people.
You won't change that language? You won't change that language in the bill?
Well, the details of the language are up to the leadership, but the specifics, the framework of addressing the legalized money laundering with state-directed payments and provider taxes must be in this bill. It should be in this bill, and I believe it will be in the bill.
Dr. Oz, what do you say about the analysis from the Congressional Budget Office and other nonpartisan observers that more than 10 million people will go without health coverage under the House-passed version of the bill?
We actually did effectively an experiment over the last 2 years where we began to reverse some of the rules under the Biden administration around Medicaid. And that unraveling of that system had 15 million Americans leave Medicaid. So when you're trying to analyze what happens to people leaving Medicaid, it's not an economic analysis as much as it's behavioral analysis. What will someone do? What will an American do if they're given the option of trying to get a job or an education or volunteering in their community, having some engagement, or losing their Medicaid insurance coverage. I have more confidence in the American people than is being given to them by some of these analyzing organizations. But more importantly, we know from what happened in the last 2 years that of the 15 million people who disenrolled from Medicaid, the incidence of unemployment went up about 10%. So it wasn't 50%. Most Americans thoughtfully, wisely re-engaged life, go back to work, find other solutions, got onto the exchanges or commercial insurance, but they did not end up without insurance. And that's why I believe that's what will happen in this case as well. I have the confidence that the American people will make that decision wisely.
Dr. Mehmet Oz, CMS administrator, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill with Senate Republicans. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, Finance Committee ranking member, spoke about the One Big Beautiful Bill and Medicaid at a Senate Democratic leadership news conference.
So much of our country is wrestling with chaos right now, and I just wanted to take a minute because here in the Senate, Republicans are working on a big economic piece of legislation that's going to bring loads more chaos into the homes of millions of Americans who are so vulnerable, who wrestle every day with the food bill against the rent bill and the rent bill against the gas bill. And now they're going to be pushed up against it every week, trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet. And this bill that my colleagues are talking about is a textbook case of class warfare. It is, in effect, caviar over kids and Mar-a-Lago over the middle class. Now, some of the Republicans in the Senate said, well, we're going to have a milder and a more gentle bill than the House of Representatives had. Well, I've had a night now to study the Senate Republican bill, but what I can tell you is it is going to cut Medicaid, which is already the biggest health care cut in American history. It is going to cut Medicaid even more than the bill in the House of Representatives. And these deeper cuts in Medicaid are going to hit rural America like a wrecking ball, and other essential health care providers, plus our states that are on a funding cliff, being put in a position where they too are going to be unable to help the vulnerable.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, Finance Committee ranking member. Kaiser Family Foundation reports that nearly 2/3, 64% of the public holds unfavorable views of the One Big Beautiful Bill passed last month by the House. Nearly twice the share who view the bill favorably, 35%. A new KFF health tracking poll finds. Wall Street today, the Dow down 299, NASDAQ down 180, S&P down 50. The U.S. Senate has passed its first major digital assets legislation, creating a federal framework for regulating payment stablecoins in the cryptocurrency market. It was a 68-30 bipartisan vote. An AP article on this notes there is a provision in the bill that bans members of Congress and their families from profiting off stablecoins, but that prohibition does not extend to the president and his family, even as President Trump builds a crypto empire from the White House. Again, that's how AP put it. Democrats did attempt to offer amendments on that subject, but were blocked by Republicans. Yahoo Finance has a story. Retail sales fell in May, dragged down by declines in gas and auto purchases during the second month that a wide array of President Trump's tariffs were in effect. Headline retail sales declined 0.9% in May, surpassing economists' expectations for a 0.6% decline month on month. That was from Yahoo Finance. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum inviting you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy, from Washington, D.C. to across the country. Coming up Wednesday morning, we'll talk about the future of Iran's nuclear program with Daryl Kimball, Executive Director of the Arms Control Association. And then Axios politics reporter Steph Kite on members of Congress receiving security briefings after the Minnesota lawmaker shootings. And the Migration Policy Institute's Doris Meisner on the impact of the Trump administration's ICE workplace raids and how immigrant workers' employment eligibility is verified. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join the conversation live at 7 Eastern Wednesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, or online at cspan.org.